Welcome to the Personal Podcast, the podcast where we get to meet the real person behind the professional. I'm your host, Charlotte Nichols, and I'm really delighted to be joined by Alec Berry, who is Associate Director at Accenture. Hopefully I said that right.
You did. Thank you.
Excellent. Right, well, straight to it, Alec.
Okay.
When did you realise that your son had a really serious heart condition?
Well, when did we realise? About 3 weeks after he was born. So Joseph was born February 2015. It was I say a normal birth, a normal pregnancy. I mean, as normal, they're all unique and different and
challenging.
Challenging, yeah. And my wife and I, naturally quite anxious people anyway. So, but generally he went term. He was breech, which is a little bit unique, but again, never really a problem. So we had a planned cesarean. He was little. He was only £5 something, but no one was really worried about that.
Right.
So yeah, we got him home, and as always, well, more so back then, but I had 2 weeks off, and then I went back to work, and then I got a call. I was down in London from actually my mum saying, "Come home. You need to come home now. Joseph's quite poorly," so we didn't really know what it was at the time, but essentially he'd had a bit of a wheeze on his chest, he'd had a little bit of a rash, and my wife took him to the GPs and he just thought might be jaundice, something like that. He was a bit off colour. Get him through to the paediatrics department, which they did. And then pretty much as soon as they put him on a SATS monitor and saw that his saturation levels were sub 60%, which is would be terminal for you or I. Someone pushed a button on the wall. 100 people came in and this, that and the other.
Were you there at that point?
I wasn't, and that was why my mum called, because she was there. So my wife, Debbie, had had a cesarean, couldn't drive. She'd actually prammed him down to the GPs and prammed him back up, and then waited for my mum to pick them up and take them through to Durham. So it was, and Debbie couldn't talk, so that was why.
And I don't blame her.
No.
And shout out to the wonderful Debbie.
Yes,
because I know she listens to the podcast. She's an amazing friend of mine.
She is, yes.
And you've both been through so much.
Yeah. So then it was blue lights to the Freeman, and in the meantime, I was in Paddington, which was where the company was that I was working for, and had to get what was the worst train journey I've ever had in my life, not quite knowing what I was coming home to.
Can you describe how you felt on that train journey?
It was surreal. So it was a Thursday, I think. So there was people having beers and things. It was about 3:00, and I was due to come back, the next day on the Friday, but obviously I just autopilot, got to King's Cross, got on the train. I remember having a strange debate with myself because at the time we lived. Darlington was our nearest station, and I'd parked my car at Darlington, and these decisions that don't really make a lot of difference, but I remember thinking, well, I can get off at Darlington and drive, and then there's a chance he'll be alive, or I can wait until I get to Newcastle and get a taxi, and I was debating, well, which one was the right decision. I ended up getting off at Darlington and driving at below legal speeds or above legal speeds, whatever the right term is, beyond legal speeds, to get there. Unfortunately, I got there as they arrived. So, and this little baby that I'd left at home was in a plastic box covered in wires and machines and things. That was a lot. Yeah.
Horrendous.
Yeah.
And you mentioned to get home and see him alive. They'll get to the hospital to see him alive. Did you think he was going to die at that point?
We didn't know. That was the. I remember asking my mum, will he make it? And she said, I'm not sure. And that was yeah. And they just didn't know what it was. I mean, there's obviously multiple reasons why a baby's oxygen saturation levels can be low. Generally, it's lungs or heart. At the time, they weren't sure which one it was. It turns out it was heart in the end, but yeah.
And what condition did he? Are we able to call him Joseph?
If we are able to call him Joseph, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I must say, he's alive. He's doing well. He's 9 years old. But yes, so he has, a collection of things, but the primary one around his heart is called tetralogy of Fallows, which is 4 interdependent conditions. I'm trying to remember if I can remember them all. So pulmonary atresia, overriding aorta, ventroseptical defect, or VSD, which is a hole in the heart, and then a thickening of the heart muscle because the heart has to work harder. It's one of those things that there's no kind of known causality as far as I'm aware. It often comes with a syndrome. So that was one of the first things they checked was, did he have Downs or did George or a similar something like that, which he didn't. But yeah, and obviously we'll go into a bit more about kind of the wider impact on us, but naturally you think, well, did we do something, or was it that half a glass of wine that Debbie had? That was the journey she went on, and things like that. So, but it's just the only way I can rationalize it is it's one of those things when one cell becomes 2 cells, becomes 4 cells. Something didn't quite go right, and then obviously as the baby grows, that's and it's one of those, it's masked often. The reason why it happened at 3 weeks, we found out, is when the baby's in the womb, there's a duct, because obviously the lungs don't have to do anything in the womb. Yeah. There's a duct that stays open essentially to circumvent that bit. That stays open to about 2.5 to 3 weeks, and then it closes. So the first thing they did was they put him on Prostogen, which makes the body think it's back in the womb. Okay. And it opened back up again. Oh, right. And that got his stats back up. So that was when they knew, right, this is a heart, this is a cardio thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah. But then he also has bronchomalacia, which is a respiratory thing. He's hypermobile as well. So he had a few things.
Oh, bless him. Yes. And so do you mention he's 9 years old now?
He is, yes.
What has that 9-year journey been like?
It's an interesting one because obviously he was our first, and we have a 6-year-old as well, Arthur. And what's been interesting is kind of seeing. I'm not saying every parenting journey is unique, but Arthur didn't even get nappy rash. He
just to rub it in.
He just turned up, and he's fine and we'll talk about it. Joseph is dyslexic as well. Arthur's taken to reading, very naturally and things. So those 9 years have been challenging, but it's hard to know until you see, how it could have been. That's true. Quite how challenging, because for the first 3 years we didn't have Arthur, and so you don't know if it's unique or if it's difficult or if it's just normal, because becoming a parent, as you know, the first time is really difficult. Yeah,
and you don't know what's normal, do you?
No, exactly. So there's a strange, I'm not saying it was a gift, but there's a strange, it's a blank piece of paper for everyone. And so, and it's such a huge change anyway. Yeah. And you're losing sleep and things. But obviously, with hindsight, you now realise, well, yes, but these challenges were additional. He's had 8 operations.
My goodness. I'm guessing pretty major operations.
Yeah. Some catheter. I'm going to say, and if Debbie was here, she'd correct me. I'm going to say 4 open heart. Wow. So and those in themselves, obviously, each of them is traumatic. Because
how do you prepare yourself for that?
You can't. You get you know what to expect, but you can't ever really get used to it. No. And I guess the more recent ones have been slightly more challenging because he's more aware, it's hard, as any parent, who's been through it would know, putting a child on an operating table, and kissing them and holding their hand as they go under anaesthetic, and then you basically just become a zombie for about 8 hours, and then you come back. Yeah. Certainly, I remember the first one. you just walk around. There's a park out opposite the Freeman Hospital in Newcastle, and I just remember Debbie and I just kind of walked around, and then you go back and wait by the phone and things. So
it's just every sinew of you praying, even if you're not religious, that they pull through.
Literally, yes, yeah. And he did, and you know, we're fortunate. I mean, I'm not a particularly spiritual person, but my wife is, and you know, the Freeman Hospital in Newcastle, of which I'm now a trustee of the charity, is one of the best centres in Europe for the condition that Joseph has.
Okay,
and so you know, Debbie thinks, well, maybe he chose us because you know. Of the proximity that we had and the fact that Debbie could take time off to look after him and things like that. So if you believe in those things, then that makes sense.
I read an interesting quote about spirituality the other day. I think it was from David Barry, but I'm not going to do it justice.
Okay.
But it said something like, if you're religious, if you want to avoid going to hell, and spirituality is for people who've been through hell.
Yes. That makes a lot of sense. And I do think, I mean, I always think of myself as more of a scientist, but, you know, the universe is a very complex place, and I think there's various dimensions and things that we just don't understand. So I could see how that would make sense, but I have to rationalise it from a scientific
I understand
background.
that.
Yes.
I'm a bit of a mix as well.
Yes.
But even, you know, obviously your heart, especially in spirituality, are really important tools. Very important biologically as well. But even just that openness, the electromagnetic energy of the heart.
Yes.
Again, you wonder how all this trauma has affected poor Joseph.
It's a really difficult one because he's quite a conscientious chap. You know, he's definitely an old soul. And again, if you believe in these things, he has a maturity to him, and and a robustness. But he's also very sensitive, and it's a difficult one because, you know, the obvious thing would be to go, well, he's been through trauma, and so he's naturally sensitive to that. But I kind of hope that he doesn't really remember much of it. You know, it's been a while since he's had a big operation. I think he was 5. It was during lockdown, so 5 or 6. If he does have sensitivities, I think that that's actually possibly more inherent within his personality, because I'm like that as well. And so it's a hard one. So how it's affected him, I hope not as much as it's affected us as his parents, other than obviously, you know, he gets out of breath a bit, he gets tired. He may never run a marathon, but that wasn't in his DNA either with me as his dad.
And he may well surprise you.
Well, quite
when you're told you can't do something.
Exactly. I mean, interesting, there's a famous snowboarder guy called Shaun White.
Okay, good name for snowboarding.
Yeah, exactly. he's had, you know, PlayStation games. He's a red-headed guy, you might have seen him, but he had the same condition that Josie was born with.
Okay. I guess that's quite important, isn't it, to know people who've gone through it and then look at what they're doing now.
Exactly.
For Joseph as well, as he's growing up, to see. You don't want it to define you.
No, that's it. That's it. And I mean, I overheard, because Joseph has quite a prominent scar and other sort of marks from his operation, but he won he got nominated and received a Brave Heart of the Northeast award a few years ago. So he now talks about himself as, you know, Brave Heart of the Northeast. And I heard him and his little brother Arthur talking about his scar, and Arthur going, I wish I had a scar, because then I'd be a brave heart as well.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yes.
But amazing that he's got that award and achievement and can own it a little bit as well. But exactly, you and Debbie are so brave as well.
Well, you do. I mean, as a parent, there's no alternative option. Do you know what I mean? And you know, we saw other parents on the ward and kids. You kind of count your blessings. You know, as I mentioned, Joseph's condition often comes with a syndrome. Joseph doesn't have one. There were other kids on the ward who did. There's more. You know, there's never been mention of needing a transplant, for example, and there was kids on the wards that did. So you count your blessings that it could be worse. And not that I'm saying we were comparing ourselves to the other parents, but you everything is relative, I guess. That's it. And so and there isn't really another option. You know, I mean, I remember when we went in, and again, my memory fails me, but we were in for, I'm going to say 3 or 4 weeks, I think, for the first stint. And I remember Debbie saying, I'm not going home without him. And so it's just those are the decisions that you make. And so it's not about being brave, it's about navigating the situation in that's put in front of you in the best way that you can, really. And those are the decisions that you make, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, bless you both. I mean, what was the lowest point over those 9 years?
There was a few points. I mean, and I don't think Debbie will mind me mentioning. I mean, once you get kind of the other side of there's a strange comfort of being in hospital. Once you kind of get used to it, of you know he's safe, and you know that if anything was to happen, there's a button to press. There's you know medical professionals that will come in, and you know he's being closely monitored. Then you get him home. And you start to factor in reality and you start to feed that in because the hospital is a very strange environment. You know, it's a bit like being at an airport, you know, where you're kind of in limbo and
totally
it's normal life just ceases and you get into the routine of, you know, sitting with machines that are beeping and looking at numbers and wires and things like that. And there are low points whilst you're there. I mean, PICU, the pediatric intensive care unit, you know, where he's post-op and he's wires and he's swollen and things like, you know, that's never good. But I think coming back home, and there was a period certainly in the probably 12 months after the most serious operation. I mean, he had one, like say, at 3 weeks. I think he had another one at 6 months. Where you then start to find what normal is, and you start to deal with the ramifications. I mean, I invest a lot of thinking into mental health and things like that, and I've seen various counsellors over the years, and one kind of likened the mind to like a filing cabinet, you know. So as things come in, as experiences happen, you file them based on experience. And but you know, when you're a baby or when you're very little, you've got maybe 2 or 3 folders in there. You know, when you grow up, it becomes more complex as you have more experiences.
Unfortunately,
yeah,
you can't find the filing cabinet you need.
Well, that's it exactly. And I think I remember a counsellor saying to me once that when you go through a traumatic experience, and this happens with soldiers or with people facing life or death, the experiences kind of get left on top. And they're there to be processed at a later date because you don't know how to process that thing because it's so raw and has so much energy and emotion attached to it. What we found, I think, was in the kind of 12 months afterwards, those things started to need processing.
Okay.
And that was really tough because you can kind of you can power through most things on adrenaline and anxiety and stuff, but then it's when you then start to go through, and Debbie suffered in a different way to me, more acutely, but also in a way that was more productive and proactive, if that makes sense.
It does make sense.
That she. Whereas I handled it in a slightly different way. But there was certainly a period where we were both struggling with the ramifications of it and processing what had happened. And that was quite difficult.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. And how did you cope with that? What was your technique for processing it?
It was different. So Debbie, and I'm going to forget what the term is, but so she could... literally put herself back in the ward, in the room, and she could hear the beeps and she could count the number of pens in the doctor's pocket and things like that, because this experience was still there to be processed. It was so raw. Yeah. She had a therapy, and you'll have to forgive me because I can't remember what the term is.
I think I know what you're talking about, but I can't remember either.
It's an acronym, and
it's not CBD, is it?
It's not.
No, but it's
a term, and essentially what they do is they wave a pen normally, but something in front of your eyes to there's something about moving your eyes left to right that forces your brain to kind of process things in a different way.
Right.
And she went through this, and it is an acronym, but this therapy to resolve that, and that allowed her to process it and to put it in a place in her mind where it wasn't constantly, because she admitted to me, you know, that she was running on autopilot a lot because she just had these things that she needed to process.
Do you have an idea for a podcast in your head? If so, we can record, produce, and promote that podcast to bring it to life. Contact us today to find out how.
For me, I kind of buried them a bit, if I'm being honest, and then dealt with them later, which isn't as healthy. But
no, and I don't like to be sexist, but often that is a way that male will deal with things compared to a woman. A woman will feel things, go through it.
Yes,
but,
and I think it's different, you know. And again, I'm not taking away from men, but certainly with your children, I think having grown the child in, you know, it's a different attachment, and so I think that's why she felt it differently, but also she handled it in a much more mature way, I think, than I did. You know, pretty much every aspect of it, so yeah, that was kind of how we got through it, and then I've sort of dealt with it latterly. But I think as well, I felt my role was more to protect her.
In that moment, and then you'll deal with it later.
Yeah, exactly, and because I could do that, and again, that's not a, you know, it's not a brave thing or anything like that. It's just that was the natural thing, was to try and protect her. Because I knew she was protecting Joseph.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And these sort of things, they can make or break a relationship. Did it bring you closer together?
I think so. I mean, you know, there are times when you think, wow, this is a fucking shitty situation that we've been handed, and you do go through the phase of, you know, you think about, well, all the people who haven't been through that, you know, but like I say, you move on from that quite quickly. I mean, our relationship has always been very, very strong. We, when we first got together, I had the opportunity to go travelling for 6 months, and we'd literally been together a few months. And I said, well, I need to go and do this. And so she quit her job and came with me, and we went around the world for 6 months together, having barely really known each other particularly. That. And again, handled some tough times there, but that kind of galvanized the relationship for both of us, you know. So we knew, okay, well, we can do this. We can handle other things as well. So yeah,
absolutely. We've certainly been tested, bless you.
Yes, yeah.
So is Joseph's heart now fixed?
It is from the original condition, but it still has some. I'm trying to think what the right word is, in that it's not fully functioning in the way that it should be, and there's still some. He's going to need further interventions in the future.
Okay.
Nothing. I mean, this was something I kind of hold on to, was, you know, the doctors say I remember when he was little, every pound he puts on, he's a bit safer. He's that bit step closer, you know. So nothing will ever be as risky as the first operation that he had at 3 weeks old. So, and again, it's kind of that you find comfort in the smaller things, but so he's bigger, he's more robust. He can handle operations, you know, the operations are lower risk. So yeah, he will need more in the future. Now it's more about the emotional aspect of it, and how we handle that with him. Because he's a bright little boy, and he's very aware of what's going on. And so it's how we navigate that with him. And we have 6 monthly check-ins. We've got one this week. He sees it as a bit of a DOS off school, so so he doesn't mind always missing swimming because it's on Thursday, so that's a big deal. But he's conscious of it, and he's aware of, he doesn't like having his, you know, bloods taken and things, and that's an area of anxiety for him. So now I think it's more about the emotional aspect of it than it is about. But yeah, he's going to need more operations in the future. But, you know, lots of people do, and again, it's risk wise, it's all relative to what he went through when he was younger. So we don't, we kind of joke that it's just a plumbing problem now. Obviously for him it's a lot more than that.
Yeah,
but,
and for you, and how do you manage that day-to-day worry? Or do you normalise it? Does that just become the normal state you operate in?
I think you do. I mean, but again, don't all parents worry about their children?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like I say, I mentioned dyslexia, which I worry more about that, if I'm being honest.
Okay, interesting. We can talk about that a bit now.
Yeah, and it's something. So it's definitely prominent in my side of the family. And I'm pretty sure I'm undiagnosed, but two of my siblings were diagnosed, and my mum is undiagnosed. So we had a meeting with school 2 years ago. I think when Joseph was 6, coming 7, I think. And they basically said, obviously we've compensated for Joseph's condition. We've compensated for lockdown because he was a lockdown baby and missed a year. Although he was schooled at home by my wife, but he missed a year of being at school, and he's not where we want him to be reading and writing wise. And so they pulled us in, and they didn't say dyslexia, but as soon as they started to mention it, I kind of thought that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
So we got him diagnosed privately, and so he has dyslexia. And again, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, he's doing okay at school. He's working harder, and we get him some additional help. But that's the thing that kind of I think about a bit more. Is well, how do we navigate that? Because I know it was tough for my brother, but he's gone on to have a great career, and he's found something that really works for him. He works in TV.
Amazing.
So he and he has dyslexia, and I suppose the ADHD is quite common with dyslexia. So he has a form of that, and because he's a director in TV, he has to sit in front of a bank of screens and constantly shift attention and think on his feet and stuff. So that works really well for him. Joseph's very creative. As
you often find that
brother.
with dyslexia.
Yeah. And when you actually think about it, they talk about people with other impairment. Impairment's not the right word, but having heightening the other skills that they have.
Yes.
So Joseph's memory is incredible, as is his ability to interpret kind of non-written languages. So he loves codes, things like that.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's because when you're not able to use all of your complement of skills, the others then become more heightened.
Absolutely.
And so I think with Joseph, it's definitely that. And then, they often say, I think with dyslexia, that in your teens, it can often catch up and things. And when your intellect takes over, your ability to read and write, and you almost muscle your way through it, sort of. And that's kind of how my brother describes it. Then you have these other strengths that you've built along the journey.
Oh, I know that for sure. Like, there's most dyslexic people I know, they're amazing entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Because they've always had to figure out another way.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of them, I mean, it's interesting is that as you start to mention these things, like in my industry, in technology, a lot of very senior people in organizations, and again in IT, because and that's I think a little bit about myself. So my written skills were always poor at school. As was my attention span. And working in IT works really well for me because I'm not having to write anything down. I can type things, and also in my job, a lot of what I do is kind of crisis management. I'm pretty good in a crisis. Rubbish the rest of the time when it comes to like being organised and diligent and things. And my bosses won't watch this, but but in a thinking on your feet real time situation, it works really well for me. So and I think Joseph's pretty good at that as well.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah.
And they're critical skills to have, because
Yes.
most people totally flap in a failure or a crisis.
That's it.
So
That's it.
you mentioned to me that you think you might have ADHD.
Yes.
What makes you think that?
What makes me think that? So I really struggle to focus on things, which is why I'm good in a high stimulating environment. So I am, I'm good in a thinking on my feet. I mean, I mentioned to you before about, exams. Exams were never great for me. I wasn't particularly academic. I did okay, but I had to work really, really hard to do that. But throw me in a sort of tactical situation or a mental arithmetic situation or something like that where you've got to think.
Yeah.
And when I'm stimulated, I work very well. Really struggle with long-term thinking, sort of highly strategic thinking, and I just get distracted. I do. I find, and obviously in the modern era with smartphones and things, there's so many distractions out there, and I find, and again, it's the strength I've developed off the back of it is I'm really good at getting things done very quickly. So I can, if I'm preparing for a meeting, I can prepare a deck in 15, 20 minutes to pitch a case and things, because I kind of have to.
Yes.
Because if I took an hour or 2 hours, it would probably be 45 minutes of messing about and then 15 minutes of actually doing it. So, and it comes back again. I mean, my childhood, and grew up in a very busy household, 3 siblings, 2 grandparents living with us. My parents ran a business, 2 siblings, as I mentioned, with sort of educational needs. And I always remember parents' evening. Alec is a bright boy, but does not pay attention, does not apply himself. And I honestly think I was just distracted. And then when I've latterly seen a bit more detail about ADHD and what is involved in it, you start to think I can relate to a lot of that stuff.
I'm questioning myself as well. We had a wonderful lady, Michelle Minikin, on the podcast recently.
Yes.
And she gave all the symptoms, and she was diagnosed in her 40s.
Yes.
And a lot of it was very similar to what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think her tests certainly involved going back through old school reports.
Right.
And then going to the doctors with that and then doing a test. And they were like, yeah, it's looking like you got it.
Yeah. And again, it's one of those things, I mean, I think everything is a spectrum, and I think everyone has different personalities and things. So, what value is the label is a kind of question that I wonder. Again with the dyslexia, because I can read and I can write and things. I have to focus again. I'm rubbish with books. I start books and then put them down again. It's that but I think having suffered from other mental health challenges, I think in my life, I think understanding will, not that I'm saying there's a reason or a causality behind it, but understanding how you are might help with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just, that I think it's Seneca that said the greatest strength in life is to know yourself.
Yes, yeah. And I do think, and that's a lifetime's pursuit, right? Because,
Yeah.
we're all complex, and also, can you really know, can the self measure itself?
Totally.
It's inherently
Always
flawed as a process, but yeah, it's something and again, it came actually because my brother, he's been diagnosed, and he said it was quite common with dyslexia. So it's something I'll probably look into. Again, do I see it as I don't know. The label's an interesting one. I think
it is, yeah. Interesting debate, and I love that. Can the self know the self? I always think, can the human brain understand the human brain?
Yeah.
I feel like we need a higher power to understand it. And it's just crazy because the brain is so like instrumental in everything, and so detailed, and we know just hardly anything.
And that's it, exactly. Yeah. It's really, I mean, and again, I tend to try and put a scientific lens on most things. I studied the the philosophy of science at university.
Amazing.
Because
I'd love that
I was
now.
forced to do it, but
you're
yeah,
forced.
the time, when I did my dissertation, the PhD guy I was working with was like, oh yeah, you definitely need a section on the philosophy of science, and I was like, okay, fine. So I did it, but that's all about how by measuring something, you're inherently applying a taxonomy to it, which is in itself a fait accompli. That it's limiting it down to saying, well, I'm measuring using this device. Well, then naturally it's going to fit within that device, and not to get into kind of quantum physics, but
Please do.
And that's something else I studied at university, which was fascinating.
I never knew that. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, it was anyways, because I did computer science, and so they put quantum computing in. But again, by measuring something, you're forcing it to collapse into a position of which it is inherently going to follow the rules by which you are measuring it. So by the brain, if you by being the brain imagining itself and considering itself, naturally it's going to follow the criteria of which you are applying.
It's confirmation bias, isn't
exactly,
it?
Exactly, yeah.
And sometimes if you think something enough, it happens anyway.
Quite, yeah, exactly.
That's so interesting.
It is.
What's one nugget of advice you could give us that you learnt in quantum physics?
Well, I guess advice, it's the thing that's kind of stuck with me is, and I'm probably going to absolutely butcher the fundamentals of quantum physics here. So
okay, I won't know.
Deep apology. Well, that's it. Yeah, as long as there's no quantum physicists. So, the world that we perceive is one iteration of it that actually exists.
Okay.
So, they've done experiments where they have fired electrons through, I think it was a piece of gold leaf, and then measured the route that the electrons took. And again, I'm absolutely butchering this, and what they were able to prove was that there's two possible routes that the electron could take.
Okay.
It takes both.
Right.
So one electron can be in two positions at any point in time.
Crazy.
And so we perceive the world, and this is when you get into Schrodinger's cat. What state is the cat in when it's in the box? Is it alive or dead? Actually, it's in a superposition of both. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's in every possible outcome. But the world that we perceive is a collapsed iteration of that. So everything exists in, this glass here is full, it's empty, it's halfway, it's on the floor, it's up there. We are perceiving a collapsed version of the superpositions of that cup. That doesn't mean, and this is where you get into parallel universes, and string theory, which again I don't claim to understand. What this glass actually exists in every possible state. Mm-hmm. So now you could essentially imply within that, well, does that mean then that I can control the state which I perceive? I don't know. But that's the crazy. When you get down to the molecular, the subquantum, gluons and the subparticles, then it the normal rules of physics that we perceive just don't work.
So fascinating. And I guess that very popular thing nowadays, which is almost making quantum physics mainstream, is the law of attraction.
Yes.
Because that's all about, well, I can make it happen sort of thing.
Yes.
Okay, what do you think of that?
I'm highly sceptical,
okay.
I'm being honest. So, and again, I've watched The Secret.
I haven't watched it, but I've heard so much about it.
So I think, so is there something... And apologies, this is a tangent, but it's something I find very interesting. Is there something to be said for perception? So how you perceive the world. So if I'm looking for a hammer, at some point, probably in the next 7 days, I'm going to spot where the hammer is in my house. Because I put it somewhere stupid.
Yeah.
And because I'm wired that way, it will be in the back of my mind that I need a hammer. Does that mean I've attracted the hammer, or does that mean that I have just been open to the possibility that a hammer exists in my house somewhere, and then when I see it, it's going to register? The Secret, which is an interesting documentary, it takes that and extrapolates it and goes, well, actually, manifested a check in the post, or I manifested a mansion, and I manifested, a beautiful partner and things like that. I don't think life is that simple. I think you make things happen. If you want them enough, and then then definitely things will come to you. But it's ignoring all the hard work that it takes to
it's almost
get
discrediting you. Or I do believe you've got to have those thoughts in the first place, but you've got to take actions to make it work.
Yes.
It's still a little bit of a mystery. I think there's still something magical that can happen.
Possibly, I kind of agree, I guess, but so I'm reading The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Oh, I've read that one.
Yeah,
that's good.
And I quite like how he puts it, that, and it's interesting because obviously it's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, but it's actually not about that. It's about the problem that a lot of us face in society is we've all been led to believe that life should be easy, should be painless.
Yeah, just think positive,
just
and it's
think
all fine.
positive, and actually that's nonsense. Life is hard.
Yeah.
Life is painful. Life has emotions, and life has problems. But the point he's making is pick your problems, and pick the pain that you're willing to endure to get the thing that you want. That to me makes more sense than manifesting a check in the post.
Yeah.
I think it's more about, okay, so, the fairy tale isn't true. That doesn't mean that you can't get what you want. You just have to be willing to deal with the pain that you want to deal with. So, my job at the minute, I love my job, and I love the hard bits of it as much as I love the good bits of it. I've had other jobs in the past that I didn't love the hard bits of, and that's why I left. And so that to me makes more sense than manifestation, which, to me, I think the implication is you can control which universe you exist in, and you can pick one. That doesn't make as much sense to me.
No, that's fair enough. I think nowadays the majority of people are looking for easy options. I think that manifestation box and the law of attraction is like, right, great, I'm going to sign up for that because then it'll happen. I just think about it.
I think that's it. And I guess there's an argument to be made, which is, well, does it matter what device you use? Because ultimately, by manifesting something, actually, are you just looking for the hammer, and you're just looking really, really hard until that thing happens? The problem I have with it is you're then sacrificing the hard work that you put in to get that thing, and kind of going, well, it's just the universe wanted me to have it, And so,
And the thing I struggle with it is when negative things happen. Did you manifest that then?
Yeah.
And then if you read the books, it does say that, well, yes, you must have done.
Yes.
And I struggle, well, why would we want that to happen?
Yeah, that's it. And then, and then you get into a spiritual debate, is it fair that Joseph has a heart condition and a respiratory condition and dyslexia? No. Did he manifest it, or did we manifest it? No.
Yeah.
Was it just terribly unfortunate? Yes. Is he doing okay? Yes. Could it be worse? Definitely. So it's it's an interesting one.
Yeah, and then there's that saying that almost you're sent these challenges and you're meant to learn lessons from them again. And I can see that in milder cases, but when it's something as serious as that, when children die, and it's just like, well, did I really need to learn that lesson? It just seems so brutal.
Yeah, and again, I'm not a religious person, but there's that interview that Stephen Fry did with and again, I'm going to get this wrong, but an Irish priest, where he talks about, things like that. If there is a God,
I haven't seen it.
But. Why would he select these things to happen, but that's a whole separate podcast.
I know. But I love how off tangent we've gone. I love this stuff.
Yeah.
But if you are looking for books that embrace that spirituality and the quantum physics, Joe Dispenza.
Right.
I've read a couple of his books now. Really good, because he has that science. It goes into kind of the particle theories and everything like that.
Yes.
In quite a simple way, which is good for me.
Yes.
So it kind of expands on the secret using actual scientific evidence.
Okay.
So there's
maybe
something to look into.
Fabulous.
So let's talk about mental health.
Yeah.
We've alluded to it. You've had your own mental health battles over the years.
Yeah, I have. And again, the obvious thing would be to attribute it to what we went through, with childbirth and what happened after that. I think it's something that's inherent within me. My opinion of it changes, a lot. I have been in and out of counselling since university. Probably when I first went, and it was my final year of university was very difficult, and it kind of, it's one of those things again latterly, with thinking about ADHD and things, it kind of makes sense, but being overwhelmed by what lay ahead, with dissertations, final year exams, and with my degree, I think your final year was worth 75% of the whole degree.
No pressure.
And no pressure, yeah. But a real chance to fuck it up. And so that was when I sort of started to speak to, and I found that it really, really helped just even talking about it. And I mean, interesting that, again, going back to my relationship with Debbie, that was, again, before we did the travelling, we kind of got together in that year, and that was what she was the first person to say, you can go and talk to someone about this stuff. So yeah, but I went through a phase at university where I wasn't sleeping. I'd wake up at 3:00 every morning in cold sweats, thinking about, dissertation, exams, all these things that I had ahead of me that I just didn't have the tools. Like I said before, if it was something I could do in an hour without thinking about and just, muscle my way through it, absolutely fine. But to actually, the concept of doing a dissertation that was 6 months in the planning and the preparation, back then I just didn't have any tools to know how to deal with that, and so naturally I was very anxious about it. So yeah, I started seeing a counsellor. It was a university supplied one, and this is early 2000s, and back then, although mental health has obviously been a thing that's been around for some time, it was different back then. It was a bit blunt. It wasn't, and it was a bit prescriptive.
Yes.
I remember they were saying, well, mindfulness is a thing. So, when you walk into university, why don't you just consider the plants as you walk past? And I was like,
sorted.
Okay, it's sorted.
Yeah.
So that, so I did that. And then latterly, I've done CBT. I've had kind of talking therapy and things. Generally, a lot of it came down to sort of self-worth. I'm highly self-critical, high, and again, another book I read was one called What's Stopping You, which is about the two types of people, those that are driven by success and those that are driven by fear of failure.
Yes. I haven't read it, but I'm aware of the types.
Basically it. In summary, but yeah, in that one, I'm very much in the latter camp, that my motivator is, what's the worst case scenario and how do I avoid it?
I think a lot of successful people are in that category.
Definitely. Yeah, I think, and again, to look at it, take a step back, it's still a driver.
Yeah.
It's still a motivator. And if you can handle it and navigate it and put the right controls in place, then it can, it can make you successful. I'm very driven. I do work hard. I do care a lot about what I do. It would be nice if it didn't come with the personal cost.
That's true.
But yeah, so that's kind of been, and I always stemmed it back to those parents' evenings, and
Really?
that was the, when I've spoken to therapists, it's been, Alec is bright but doesn't try hard enough, and being seen as a failure is the thing I'm constantly trying to avoid.
It's so weird though, because you could see that as, I've got potential, I'm just not choosing not to fulfill it.
Yeah.
It's a positive twist, but I get it. But when I've had therapy in the past, and I suffered, and actually I was just thinking this, I don't think I've told anyone about this, but in my first year and potentially even second year at uni, I suffered horrendous panic attacks.
Really?
But I told my mum and dad, and that was it. Because again, you just didn't talk about these things. And if anyone from uni listens to this, they'll be like, "What? I had no idea." But but it was just something that you went through.
It is, and university's such a strange thing. And it's something Debbie and I reflect on because for a lot of people, it's the best time of their life. For me, it wasn't. And that's okay. I had a wonderful time before university, doing my A-levels, and I had a wonderful time after university at work. I found it very difficult. I was in Manchester, it was a big city. I'd not been there before. I had, my course was very dry. And we had, I remember like week 1, year 1, having 30 hours a week lectures and labs on top of that.
Wow.
When I had other pals that were doing other degrees that had like 6.
Yeah. I was in that other category with the 6. Well, I probably had more, but I only went to 6.
Yeah, okay.
But I really struggled with the boredom. I was used to that high pressure environment and
Yes.
swimming on top of the school. So I would be calling mum and dad saying, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's almost like the time to think drove me crazy because I'm that sort of person.
Yeah.
Overthought everything.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting because, on the surface, though, I bet everyone's thinking you're having the time of your life.
Yeah, but no. And I had some other things. I had a girlfriend at the time who had anorexia.
Oh, my goodness.
And that was, a lot to deal with at 17. But, and so actually my first year I was driving to and from a hospice in Sheffield to look after her. So that obviously had a different angle to it as well. But yeah, the mental health journey is one, and I think it's something. I mean, my dad he retired about 3 years ago, and again, it's the stuff on top of the filing cabinet. You've got to work through that stuff at some point. And so he started seeing a counsellor, and that's really, really helped him. But that's my kind of mental health for me. It's you've got to do the work, and you've got to look at this stuff head on and try and understand it. Because if you avoid it, unless you're a lot more thick-skinned than I am and things, at some point you've got to face this stuff head on and deal with it. And I'm fortunate through Debbie that she introduced me to it quite early on in my life, and I'm very, very comfortable. But I'm not seeing a counsellor right now. I suspect I will do in the future at some point if I need to. I'm fortunate to work for a great company that has support like that in place, that you can just dip into and things. So yeah, and it's something I think again that's helped me. So I like to think a lot of people at work come to me with their personal problems and things, and I think it's because I'm comfortable talking about that stuff.
Yeah,
and
you're open and vulnerable about your own.
Yeah, exactly. And I have talked about it. We did a sort of mini How to Fail podcast at work, and I talked again about my academic failures, my failures as a parent, and failures as a husband. I think were the 3 that I chose. And I would hope that through that people would be comfortable coming to talk to me about other things as well.
Absolutely. I think we have to be really comfortable with our failures and learn from them. And
definitely.
as hard as it is to be like that, but also equally not to see everything. It's easy to see everything negatively, especially when you sound quite similar to me and you give yourself a hard time.
Yes.
Just think, actually, it wasn't all my fault.
No, that's the thing. And what you find, I mean, things are supposed to get easier as you get an adult, but I think things just get more complex.
Yeah.
And certainly what I've found, now there's a rich tapestry of things that I could project my own failure onto, and it's navigating that, when you've got a busy job with responsibility attached to it, when you've got a young family, a marriage, even a house that needs work and things.
Yeah. The financial pressures these days.
Finance, all sorts of things. So, like I say, in a lot of ways, although I think you grow and you develop the tools and the mechanisms to manage this stuff, it doesn't get easier because the world becomes more complex and there's more about it. So, I look forward to the day when I worry less about things, but it hasn't quite come yet. But I guess I'm just a lot more comfortable. I used to, again, I think similar to yourself, I had several panic attacks when I was younger, and it was just sheer the weight of stress that I was placing on myself and the lack of ability to get myself out of it. I remember, referring to the girlfriend I had at the time, that was a difficult relationship to be in, because it wasn't a traditional, 17-year-old relationship. And I remember being in a restaurant with her, and I've not shared this story I don't know, I've probably shared it with Debbie, but being in a restaurant and looking at the cutlery and thinking, if I stick this fork in my hand now, I can get out of this situation. I can leave this restaurant and I can go and that'll be the thing, because I didn't know how to get out of it. Do you know what I mean? Right? Whereas now I would go, okay, this isn't a relationship or whatever.
You don't have the skills at that age, do
you?
Yeah.
So I think when you get older, you become more capable of handling things like this, but the things become more complex.
Definitely, but I guess you only become more capable through going through the situation.
Correct. Yes, correct.
Is that almost like emotional age versus your actual age? And that can be anything depending on what the experiences you've been through.
That's it. And that was part of the reason why, when I was very fortunately asked to be a trustee of the Children's Heart Unit Fund, I took that on because they actually didn't have any parents in the board of trustees at that point who, actually no, that's not true. So they had Ivan, who's the head of the trustees board, but didn't have any other parents who'd gone through it. And so what I was hoping was that by joining that, I could both bring that perspective, but also if an opportunity came up to help, someone else who'd been through it, then, because I remember the first day being there and just not having any idea how we were going to navigate it, and we did, and we, because you have to. There's no other option, you can't go, right, I'm just going to go home and not think about
I'm not
this.
dealing with this.
Yeah. And so that's kind of why I took that opportunity to go through
good
that.
for you, and I bet it'll help you feel better and help so many other parents going through it.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to give something back, and to go to say thank you to them, because I mean they literally, even down to the toothbrushes that we got on the first night we were there. It's the sort of thing at the time.
Little things.
Yeah, I remember someone saying, because there's a block of accommodation at the Freeman Hospital, and that had just opened 6 months earlier, and it was brand new, and there was a bedroom and it was like a little house you could stay in. I remember at the time someone saying, literally on the first night, well, you're really lucky because this accommodation is here. And I remember at the time thinking, I don't feel particularly lucky at all, But then with hindsight, we were, and it's stuff like that makes a world of difference. Like I say, even the toothbrush, because you
don't think about a toothbrush, do you, in those situations?
That's it, because we came with nothing, So yeah.
Oh, bless you. Right. Thank you so much for talking to me about really personal content, and I love the filing cabinet analogy.
Yes.
And having it on top, that makes so much sense.
It does, yes.
And totally believe you have to feel the feelings to go through them. And a really nice analogy I heard was like it's like the bear hunt book. We're going on a bear hunt. So you can't go over it. You can't go under it. You've got to go through it.
You do, yes.
And it's really painful going through it. That's the only way you're going to get through it.
Yes, that's it.
So yeah, thank you so much, Alec, but we're not quite finished.
Oh, right.
We've got our regular questions.
Okay.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, how would you rate yourself at the following? And I'm going to get verification from Debbie at some point.
Okay, fabulous. Well, she'll give you the right answers. Yeah.
How good looking are you?
5.
Harsh. How funny are you?
Oh, on a good day, I'd say 9.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Are you good at cooking?
If it's something I know, probably a 7, but Debbie is better at everything that I try. So she asks me to do stuff, but then she regularly regrets it. Because she's just amazing.
Oh, brilliant. Are you good at singing?
Oh, no.
I just said you were,
Okay.
Yeah.
I probably think that I am, but no. I'd love to be. I don't think a musical bone in my body, but I would love to. Yeah.
Oh, lovely. Alcohol?
I don't drink.
Oh, good.
No, so I said, at my 40th I had a few pints.
Yeah,
but,
special occasions.
Yeah, that's it. And again, I think, not to be boring, but I spend so much time working on my mental health. I think to actively do something that I know is going to potentially have an impact the next day.
I totally get it.
I don't. So I guess 0.
It really impacts me as well.
Yeah.
I rarely drink these days.
Yes,
Because of that reason.
That's it. And certainly with young kids and stuff, I have enough struggle getting sleep.
I know,
never
exactly.
mind. Yes.
Parenting skills.
It's a minefield. I mean, from love and compassion, it's a 10. I think from, and this is an area that I'm giving myself a hard time about at the minute. Doing all of the organised, healthy things that you should do with a child. I'm going to say 5 because I don't. It doesn't come naturally to me. At least I don't believe it does. But again, that's skewed by my self-critical lens.
Yeah, but there's so much pressure these days. You've got to give them kale, mindfulness exercises.
Yes, they have to eat.
They can't hear no. You've got to reframe it in their mind.
Correct.
Yeah, so you're doing terrible.
Yes,
yeah.
That's true.
Just like I am if you're judging on those metrics.
That's it.
How good a friend are you?
Oh, so I would say an 8 when the opportunity presents itself.
Okay.
I've got a handful of very good friends who I love to bits, who I don't see as much as I would like. But when I do, I'd like to think that, they come to me with problems, they open up, I listen, I care. The challenge I've got is I just don't have enough time to... but yeah, I think there's a few people at work that like me. So
Okay.
yeah, I'd like to say 8.
So you're a good reactive friend
I
rather than
think so.
proactive.
Yeah, possibly. Oh no, yeah, maybe. Maybe.
No, I'm sure you're proactive too.
Yes.
Intelligence.
I think I know a little bit about a lot. So I'm going to say 7.
I mean, you've talked about quantum physics.
Well, that's it. But I imagine 90% of it was nonsense. But
no,
yes.
you've made it make sense, which I think is a really important skill.
Okay,
You're simplifying the complex, I think, is a sign of intelligence.
Sure. Okay.
So yeah,
Yes.
you're up there in my books.
Yeah, okay.
Kindness.
I'd like to say 9. I don't think, other than occasionally getting frustrated with the dog at home and things. We have a mental spaniel, but yeah, I don't think I'm particularly malicious, so yeah, I'd like to say 9.
Do you think what you've been through makes you kinder?
Yeah, they say, someone said, you become the parent that you needed as a child. And I remember as a child generally feeling a bit lost. And, my parents are wonderful people, but they had, they were very busy when we were growing up. And so I needed, I think, a bit more. And when I look at my kids now, I see, okay, well, that's how much kids do need. I think I've become kinder because, I've had some challenges that have needed some kindness, I think.
I definitely think that's the case for me.
Yeah.
I don't think this podcast would exist if I hadn't gone through the challenges I have.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
And finally, how good at sex are you, Alec?
I'm not going to answer that.
Okay, I'll ask Debbie.
Check with Debbie, please.
Okay.
Probably a negative score, I'm sure.
I'll put the score in the show notes.
Thank you
once
very
I've
much.
verified.
Please.